human beings have an enormous impact on the planet through our activities. And one of our most impactful activities is our agricultural system, and specifically the growing of animals for food. We could save more in terms of resources and in terms of cutting climate change by shifting to eating plants instead of animals than we could by changing the way we drive. The United Nations put out a report a couple years ago called Livestock's Long Shadow, and in that report they talked about how animal agriculture was one of the top contributors to the most serious environmental problems our planet faces, including climate change. So it's important that people are driving hybrid cars or walking or bicycling or carpooling or doing whatever they're doing to lighten their carbon footprint. But one of the most important things we can do is to change the way we eat and to eat plants instead of animals. For people who are in animal agriculture, say a rancher, for example, that has, a couple hundred cattle, and he's raising them, he's invested in them, and he's expecting income based on those. I understand that that's kind of a tough spot, and what I would suggest is that that rancher and other people involved in animal agriculture start transitioning and using some of their land for plant-based agriculture. And if it's land that's used for grazing, that may not be the best land for growing crops, something to consider is ecotourism. Lots of people want to be out in the country, they want to be in a natural green environment, they want to be around animals. So some of these ranches could even be transitioned into becoming sanctuaries. And that's actually starting to happen. So I think each person has to do what they can in the place where they are. Oftentimes change will happen incrementally, but it's about looking for solutions, looking for activities, looking for income sources that are more aligned with one's own compassion and aligned with one's own interest and don't cause unnecessary harm. And so growing plants instead of animals is an obvious shift, and depending on the land, that can sometimes be extremely profitable and extremely effective. And in some cases, you can even build up the soil. So land or soil that's not that great can be built up by working it. And then there are also side businesses that can come from plant-based agriculture. In addition to growing food and selling it, there can be services where, for instance, people help folks that have houses to transition their lawns into gardens, and there's a whole food not lawns movement right now. So in addition to actually growing food and selling it, people can provide a service to others who are interested in growing their own food or having their property have a garden on it, but they may not have time to do the garden, so this would be another job opportunity. And there's, what's it called? There's landscaping, there's like, outdoor landscaping. People can get involved with outdoor landscaping where they're actually helping to design gardens around new houses or even old houses and retrofitting them and creating a situation where people can grow food right at their own house. And that's really what you call local food. There have actually been a couple of ranchers, people like Howard Lyman, for example, who's quite well known now because he was on Oprah and talked about this, but he was a rancher and he's now a vegan advocate. There are other people, in fact, there's a sanctuary in Portland, or near Portland, Oregon, that used to be a family farm where they raised animals, that is now an animal sanctuary. There's another one in Texas. There are people also in Massachusetts who I believe have done this. They used to be in animal agriculture and now they have become a sanctuary. There's another one in California. So there's a number of people now who are taking a different path and are not doing what their parents or their families have done and have a different sentiment about raising animals in a humane way and not killing and eating them. And there are people also in cities who are kind of bucking the system. Sometimes homeowners associations or other neighbor groups aren't crazy about a lawn being turned into a garden. I don't understand it. I think a garden is much better than a lawn, which oftentimes comes with chemical fertilizers and unhealthy things. But sometimes neighborhoods want to have these lawns for whatever reason. But there are people that are starting to buck that system as well. There was a guy in Los Angeles, California, who actually started growing vegetables on the side of streets where there was little patches of dirt. And the city of LA came after him and discouraged him from doing that. But he fought back, and he was able to actually get permission, ultimately, to grow vegetables in these public areas in Los Angeles. So change happens, sometimes slowly, sometimes there's opposition to it, but if people sort of hold their ground, make a good case, approach it in a respectful, honest, compassionate way, and have a solution, I think oftentimes other people will see that and will ultimately embrace that solution. This idea of growing our own food and having community gardens, or having victory gardens as they were called during World War II, is not a new thing. In fact, it's something that human beings have done throughout most of our history, and we've just gotten away from it over the past several decades. And I think people are rediscovering that growing your own food, harvesting your own food, and eating it can be very empowering. It can connect us to the earth, and the food tends to taste a lot better as well. You know, if it's there fresh, and if we're growing our own food, it's going to be a lot fresher than if we buy it in the grocery store where it's been harvested somewhere else and then shipped in. So growing your own food has lots of benefits. We tend to eat a fairly small variety of foods and grow a small variety of foods. You know, they call them commodity crops from the USDA. They're corn and soybeans, for example. We could grow a huge variety of different kinds of fruits and vegetables and grains and plant foods. And I think that there are now farmers starting to experiment with new forms of plant-based agriculture. And instead of going for the commodity crops and the massive monocrop farms, they're developing more diversified farms, more community-oriented farms. Community-supported agriculture programs are popping up, and sometimes people involved with those want a variety of different kinds of vegetables. And it becomes a creative process when you have new, like a cherimoya fruit, for example. What do you do with it? But these can be grown in certain parts of the country, and people are experimenting and getting creative and learning that there's a lot more out there than our typical apples and bananas and oranges. There's lots of different kinds of fruit. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for people in the farming business to grow these kinds of unique fruits, but also to do further process, to make jams and jellies, for example, of commonly used plant foods or of new ones, perhaps, and maybe even combining them. So there's lots of opportunities for people that want to explore plant-based agriculture, the plant-based food business. It's a really exciting time for people interested in that. In addition to growing food and harvesting one's own food, there's opportunities to harvest and sell seeds and to reignite an interest in some of these traditional heritage types of foods that we've had for so long. And that's part of this food movement right now. Rodale has been doing it for a long time, but there are other seed savers that are, I think, growing and popping up. And not only do you sell seeds, but sometimes you can just share seeds. So if somebody is growing certain crops at their house, certain kinds of tomatoes, for example, they can give those tomatoes to a friend or share the seeds with a friend, and then they can grow them. The nice thing, too, about growing your own food is that you often have excess of what you need. So then you give it to your friends, and it becomes a very generous endeavor. And then if your friend is growing something else and they have excess, they give it to you. And in this way, you could actually even coordinate where somebody, has a peach tree, for example, and somebody else has an apple tree. And, somebody has too many peaches, they share the peaches. Somebody has too many apples, they share the apples. And each person gets both peaches and apples, and maybe a wider variety of foods as well. So gardening and sharing like that also helps to build community and create community in a very healthy way. So at Farm Sanctuary, the animals are our friends, not our food, and people get a chance to come and interact with them, get to know them as individuals, to look into their eyes, and to see that there is somebody there, not that different than the cats and dogs that we live with. In fact, Winston Churchill, when talking about animals, said that dogs look up to people, cats look down on people, and pigs look you straight in the eye. And I think that's really true. If you ever look into a pig's eyes, they're very much like a human's eyes. And pigs are very vocal, they're very individualistic like human beings, they're very intelligent, they have interests, they express their interests, and they want to do certain things, and they'll let you know that. We have pigs at the sanctuary, for example, who totally love belly rubs. And when you approach them and you touch their tummy, they will flop over and they'll start grunting in pleasure, communicating that they want you to keep rubbing their belly because they really enjoy it. These are animals that have feelings and they have relationships, and like us and like other animals, they just want to enjoy life and they don't want to be abused, they don't want to suffer, they don't want to be afraid, they want to have a good life. And at Farm Sanctuary, they're allowed to do that. And when the animals at the sanctuary enjoy their lives and they frolic and play, it brings joy to us as well, because we can watch this and we can experience it along with them. And you contrast that with life in a factory farm where animals are in just misery, and it affects you. You know, going into these places, you can sense the stress. It's palpable. You breathe this thick, toxic air, and it's palpable. And it's sick and unhealthy and cruel and violent and unnecessary. So Farm Sanctuary really is the antidote to that. It's a place where animals get to enjoy themselves, where we also get to enjoy their lives and their joy. And it's a healing place for the animals and a healing place for us, because going into those factory farms time and time again is not easy. And it's even been said that animal rescue is the crack cocaine of the animal movement. And I can see where that comes from. You know, when you're able to take an animal out of that kind of a violent place and give them a good life and watch them heal, it helps you to heal from what you've observed. And you want to just keep doing that. The tough part, of course, for Farm Sanctuary or any sanctuary is that you can't rescue them all. So the animals who we do rescue ultimately have to become ambassadors. And we tell their stories, and we encourage people to recognize that these animals, just like cats, dogs, and other animals, have feelings and deserve to be treated with respect. They have their own experiences, and they have their own lives. And when we recognize that, I think it enriches our lives as well. At Farm Sanctuary, we encourage people to come visit. In many cases, we're able to get school children to visit and families, and it's really nice to see children interacting with animals. I think there's sort of a natural connection that kids have before they start being acculturated to disrespect, especially farm animals. Most people, I think, are appalled to learn what happens on factory farms, and kids especially. There have been a number of videos lately online where you see children just reacting when they learn that they're actually eating a dead animal. And it's really been heartening to see this, and for those kinds of videos to be spread, for those kinds of sentiments and natural emotions to be celebrated and encouraged and shared. And I think the more that happens, the better, because human beings are social animals. We learn from those around us. And if everybody is doing something, we observe it, and the chances are, as human beings, we're going to probably start doing it too, because that's all we know. And I grew up eating meat like most people around me because that's all I knew. Everybody around me was doing it. But as time goes, and as there are more people who are not eating animals, and there are more vegans, those will now present examples. And children growing up, seeing these vegans, and in many cases, parents are having vegan children, there are new examples that children can follow. And rather than eating animals being the norm, there is now a question about whether that should be the norm. And the more vegans there are, I think, the more vegans there will be, because we are social animals. We learn from those around us. And thankfully, there are more vegans now than there have ever been. And there are even a new generation of vegan children being raised who've never eaten animal products at all.